Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter. I am the leader of the Preston Liberal Democrats and I host this motley crew. And today, back once again, we have Sam Al-Hamdani from the Oldham Liberal Democrats. How are you doing, Sam?
Good, thanks. You?
I'm very well. Well, as good as can be expected under this Tory government, but we will get onto that a little bit later. And a kind of bittersweet moment for the podcast because we have a farewell episode to our wonderful Claire Halliwell, who is the Chief Exec of the Welsh Lib Dems, who will be soon leaving post. And although she may be on the podcast WhatsApp, she will not be appearing on the podcast again. Welcome, Claire. It's good to have you on again.
Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.
So, firstly, congratulations, Claire. This episode isn't going to be all about you, although it is tempting. But I suppose from all of us at the podcast and the Lib Dems, thank you so much for your service to the Lib Dems as well. You have been absolutely incredible. And I mean, the things you've done, whether it's Ed's leadership campaign, working for the party. How long have you worked for the party now, roughly?
So I will be 13 years and 11 months by the time I leave.
Not that you're counting the months.
Not that I'm not quite doing days. I have looked into it. But yeah, a huge, all of my adult life, other than one job, which doesn't really count. So it's been a huge part of my life, and a huge thank you to all of the volunteers and people that I've met along the way, because you've made it special. So thank you.
Oh, well, no doubt you'll be giving insights, but just what we'll do, see, it's even better now for me and you, Sam, is like Claire can give us fantastic insights and we just pass them off as our own. This is the way it's going to work. So that's but very much welcome, Claire. Now, Sam, we will start with you because the news travels at 1,000,000 miles an hour, like a slap from Will Smith. But right now, obviously, the big issue is Sunak's statement that came out last week. Now, there's been a little bit of, like all budget statements, it's always the devil in the detail afterwards that you kind of clock onto. And so we've had a few days to analyse what's happened. So what are your first impressions of the Sunak statement last week?
I found it massively underwhelming. I wasn't actually listening at the time. I was out delivering leaflets like every good Liberal Democrat, and then came back to catch up on it. And it took me several attempts to actually figure out exactly what he'd said, because it was just sort of mishmashy, and there's some things in there about national insurance, but it's not really the big statement that we were actually expecting. And I had to stop and eventually sit down for quite a while and go, what actually was in there? It was bizarre, because it's a time when they needed to make a really big statement. And they did the opposite.
Yeah, Claire, and I suppose this all comes into the kind of the background of, inflation's expected to reach almost 9% by the end of this year. The squeeze on living standards, which is obviously going to be absolutely huge this year. Lots of people are getting their bills coming through. So I've had my fixed term finishes in May. So I'm going from £98 a month to potentially £260 a month. And, and I'm just in a fairly modest semi-detached house. There'll be people that are going to get clobbered, much more so, particularly people that have extra energy consumption, such as the disabled, the vulnerable, the elderly, all these sort of people. And again, a bit like Sam, it was just kind of, is that it?
Well, I think that's it. And normally you look at the Conservatives and you think, they're particularly going to, give a good shout out to pensioners or something like that. Especially, it's always an election year, but especially as we know we're heading potentially towards a general election at some point in the not too distant future. And actually all of those key groups that we know they need to get on board for doing well in elections, they don't seem to have given, they haven't pulled the rabbit out of the hat like they normally do. And actually watching it live, you sort of thought, actually maybe they're going to, things are turning around because they are able to say about national insurance, income tax, etc. But the way the front pages look the next day, when even the Daily Express is decrying you, then I would firmly say that it wasn't a very good budget for Sunak.
But it's interesting because the press were pretty scathing. Like I said, even the most Tory of Tory papers was like, and I listened to things like the Spectator podcast as well. A lot of them were going, that isn't an election winning kind of change of force. Because don't forget where the Tory parties have come from. We've been distracted by things like the conflict in Ukraine, etc. But actually, Partygate and the Tories were proper on the ropes, and this was a chance for them to kind of get back on the front foot. And nobody seems to think it was. But the only people that did, apparently, according to the rumours out of Westminster, the Tory MPs loved it. So is that just them a bit of rallying behind a future leader, do we think?
Well, whether it's about that or whether it's just about, as you say, keeping things level, it didn't, I wouldn't say it overly scared people away. I was outdoor knocking this weekend in my volunteer time, and cost of living definitely came up, but whether people associated that with the Tories were to blame rather than other, they seem to have done a very good job of aligning it towards the conflict in Ukraine and saying that, part of the reason the bills are going up is because of the conflict. I think we all know that they would have been going up anyway. Obviously, some in Mid and West Wales that are particularly hit hard are those actually that aren't on mains gas, etc., but are having to rely on heating oil. And there's no support for people like that. So that's lots of rural communities that are going to be massively hit on the basis of a conflict abroad, of that, petrol costs, etc., and fuel rising. That significantly impacts them. And I would consider them as key demographic voters for Conservatives. So where they're going to get their vote from next time, I'm less than sure.
Sam?
I would totally agree. I mean, so my sort of ward borders on some very rural areas, and you can see what's happening in terms of, and specifically, Claire mentioned people who are using oil. We've started to see instances of people breaking into properties and draining oil tanks because the value of the oil is going up and it's needed. And so those communities are just getting it from all directions. It's outrageous. And I really expected to see some sort of element of some group that was targeted by the Treasury to go, this one's for you. And it wasn't. And I have to say, we mentioned earlier about when a general election is coming up. Looking at this budget statement, it didn't even seem to be on the horizon.
No. And I think that was interesting because a lot of, again, commentary afterwards was saying, the income tax call to reduce it by a penny by 2024, it was an interesting one. Everyone said, okay, the election's not happening to 2024 then. Now, how the Tories do that, I think as soon as there's an opportunity moment now, the Tories will go for it. The Fixed Term Parliament Act has now been repealed. That's the important thing. So obviously it shouldn't have been repealed, but Tories being Tories want to just do it when it's most advantageous to them. But nobody seems to think that. Do we think it's going to be 2023?
I think they've told their teams, haven't they?
Yeah.
I think part of the statement that came out around their spring conference was get ready for 2023. I think there is no harm in us doing the same. It's better to be ready than not to be. But I think the longer this goes on, the longer I agree with you. I think they'll just try and keep it off until there's an opportune moment. And let's also be honest, Keir Starmer hasn't really, again, come on the front foot about the budget. I don't feel that I know any more of what the Labour Party would do differently. They'd obviously, there's a lot of discussion about, the windfall tax, which we're obviously pro, but I don't feel it's got the cut through that maybe it would have done otherwise. So maybe the Tories are taking it as a bit of a win that actually the opposition haven't really got the extra motivation that they need to get more people over the line.
Is that the opposition, and you've got to include the Lib Dems in this, just not throwing good enough punches? I mean, I did think the phrase the Lib Dems used was given with one hand, taken with another, isn't the most hard-hitting of kind of analogies to use. And this is not me criticising HQ or anything like that, but it isn't something that's going to cut through. I'm so angry at the Tories, they're given with one hand and taken with another, because I think most people will just probably say, well, don't all kind of politicians and councils and everything do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the language in the press releases that we put out in the detail of what we said was much harder hitting than that. Yeah. And it was, and that messaging just wasn't smooth. Like it needed to be. You need to put the big killer statement up front, and it was the other way around. So I'd agree. Yeah, we could have hit a lot harder with the messaging.
And I think there's still the outstanding question for most voters, well, what are you going to do differently? And sometimes when it is, which fundamentally it always is with the budget, is it is tinkering around the edges, then people don't think that is a big enough reason, sadly, to make a different choice. And whether the Tories are just taking that opportune moment to go, actually, that this is where we're at. The opposition aren't going to come for us. They've got nothing they can do. The only thing it will probably do, dare I say, is strengthen the SNP's arguments, sadly. But, I think there is lots of opportunity that just nobody is really taking hold of at the moment.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Rains website at praetorrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, what's interesting with Sunak's favourability, so that a poll just out 2 days ago shows his favourability now at -15 when it was up beyond 40, plus 40. I mean, that does help when you give people a shed load of money in furlough. But he has been dramatically going down and had a 10-point drop last week. So and this is, I'm not trying to influence things because I do have an interest in this because I put a bet on quite a while ago that Tom Tugendhat was going to be the next Tory leader and he's now moved into second place. So I don't want to influence anybody. And to Mr. Paddy Power, I'm not cashing out. I'm going to keep that going. But I do think Sunak is coming across a little bit like a lightweight. Or maybe a bit indecisive to the point where people think, furlough, bang, wonderful. Now it's like kind of, he just doesn't seem, he's not doing this or other. He's not like saying, right, if you're going to be a low tax Tory Chancellor, which he keeps on talking about, then do something big. And instead he's not, he's muddling. And so he's not pleasing the Tory right and he's not pleasing anyone else either.
No, I agree. And I think the problem as well is that obviously the furlough scheme in particular was such an antithesis of what we normally expect of the Conservatives. So he's never really going to ever be, well, he couldn't afford that. So how he's going to be able to afford any other big offers is going to be really, really difficult. And I just think, as you say, some of the stardust is coming away. And I think it's a fairly open field now for the Conservatives of who will be the next leader. And to a certain extent, that strengthens Boris's position for a little longer.
And that, Sam, coming to you, I mean, on our Christmas episode, we asked the question of all of it. I know it seems like a long time ago now. We asked the question and it was universal. They didn't think Boris would see out the year. Now, I mean, 2 weeks into January with the whole Partygate thing, you would be absolutely sure he was gone. What do you feel his position's like now?
I think, as Claire just said, nobody is lining up to take over. And if you don't have the Tories' approach to how you choose a leader is who's going to win me this next thing.
Yeah.
And unless you've got a conclusive answer to why it's someone other than Boris Johnson, why would you jump? Now, that doesn't fit with typical psychology of how these decisions are made. And it is noticeable. I read an article, and I can't even remember where I read it the other day, but just talking about how there is a complete vacuum across the political spectrum of inspirational national political figures. And the worrying thing is you can't tell where somebody inspirational is going to come from. And that's what Nigel Farage took advantage of.
Yeah. And it creates a vacuum there where if there's no one really setting the world on fire, then someone comes in and does. And like I said, whether that's, you go back to the Trump era of American politics, to be honest, the Democrats had looked very samey after Barack Obama, who from that group you really thought, Hillary Clinton, I have no problem with Hillary Clinton, but you wouldn't say she's a particularly amazing, I'm going to get out there and do it for her candidate. As much as it would have been brilliant to have a female president, she didn't blow anyone's socks away. And I think we're in that state now where you can have a Farage come in, but then, and you've linked nicely to Farage. So let's go on to talk about some of the other stuff that's come in the news as well. It's about Russian money that has come in. And Sunak's involved with this as well. Actually, some of these little scandals about, and Sunak getting absolutely grilled about his family's investments in Russian money, alleged. I don't want to get it. But again, it just leaves the fact that the Tories are on the back foot in this. But do we think people care? Do we think people care that we care because we're into it, and we've known, and they haven't released the Russia report yet about interference, but do you think the public actually care?
I think, number one, we should be so thankful for the media that we've got. I think if anything's been shown to us in the recent months is how important it is having independent media sources and a variety of sources, not just one or two. But secondly, I don't think it's not coming up on any doorstep that I'm knocking on, and I don't think that's specific to Wales. I think out of people's worries, sadly, interference in democracy is quite down there in their list of priorities, and it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It just means it's not at the forefront of voters' minds. And I think we do have a job to again point out where there is a form of corruption or incorrect behaviour happening, and that's on all of us to point out. But I wouldn't necessarily suggest we all put it on the front page of our focus leaflet.
And it's also, these things move on, Sam. So remember during the scandals regarding MPs and second jobs, and obviously Geoffrey Cox being in I think it was a Caribbean island and still working as an MP. It was very clear, but that's now, all those reforms have now been shelved. They are not now going to happen. So wait for the circus to go move on to another topic, and then shelve what the good things you were supposed to do. But I'll let you answer that question. Then I've got another question for you about reactionary politics.
Well, I think as you were going through, I was trying to think back to, if you remember the expenses scandals from sort of Major era, and I was trying to think through what was the political situation at the time. It was post. We'd had a sort of recessionary period, and it was post that. We'd had sort of first Iraq War, but it wasn't around that. So the big things that were happening weren't at the same time as the expenses scandal. And so there was kind of from memory, I hate somebody to just turn around and go, did you forget about this really obvious thing? But from memory, there wasn't something there that was grabbing people's attention away from it. Whereas right now, I mean, you've got 100 things grabbing people's attention away from it, not least the fact that you're going to double your energy bills in the next 6 months and have national, and all of those things. And if you're worried about how you're going to put food on the table next week, then you're not worried about whether somebody's taking money from a Russian.
And actually, one of the things that's coming up, I mean, most economists are expecting the British economy to go into some sort of recession as we go into things, which again is kind of destroys another plank of Tory election strategy, is that, you can trust the Tories on the economy. Well, and they'll say, it was COVID, it was such and such, it was such a... But again, even the Daily Express saying Brexit has caused a 15% drop in our overseas trade. But it's really interesting going forward, because what this government, for me, has characterised this government more than anything else is their reactionary element to it. And that is either COVID, Brexit, whatever. They'll wait for something to get to so bad, even though they've been warned about it, and then they react suddenly and usually do like a half-baked job. And that's the same with Afghanistan, like I say, with a lot of the COVID issues, with the school exams fiasco. It was always the same. It's like kind of head in the sand, we'll get through it. Oh no, it's got worse, we better do something. So, which is obviously a terrible way of governing. And if you, all of us that are on councils, will think, okay, you kind of want to have some sort of forward plan and also worst case scenario planning, but they don't seem to do any of that, do they, Claire?
No, and I suppose the thing is that we've been walloped with so many of these once in a generation things in probably the space of 3 years, like you said, Brexit plus the cost of living crisis, which you could, obviously there are parallels to why both are happening at the same time. plus Ukraine, Partygate, etc. These aren't things that would normally happen all at the same time. And you do keep thinking, is there any more bad news for them to bury? They're sort of lucky, in inverted commas, that sometimes some of the information does get lost because there is always another bigger story out there. But eventually something's going to stick. And I think that is what we saw in the major government. We didn't see it immediately, but that idea of sleaze, etc., they couldn't shake off. And it's whether the Tories will do a good enough job over the next couple of years to shake it off before a general election. But as you say, it always seems reactive. Very little of it has been proactive. But whether that is just circumstance rather than anything in their control, I'm not so sure.
Sam, I suppose the way you can go is two ways going forward. So it will either be a bit like Trump, where everyone said, how could anyone possibly vote for him? After all the craziness that we've had, how could they possibly? And still loads of people did because, it was the way American society had changed. Basically, the demographics had shifted, voting patterns had shifted. So will that happen in the UK, that the Tories will maybe do better than we think right now? Or do we think there's been a fundamental shift in actually that they gave Boris a chance, COVID came, completely unprecedented for a lot of people, but now the varnish has completely gone and we're seeing like kind of true colours of incompetence?
Well, all too often, Conservatives do better than we think they're going to do. And you can go back through, we didn't think that they'd get a majority at the 2015 election. We didn't think they'd get the majority they did necessarily in 2019. 2017 was an odd one, but still they didn't lose control. They had a really bad experience and then didn't lose control.
Do we think this will have a knock-on effect? I mean, and the classic big one is obviously general election we've talked about. A huge electoral test for the Tories coming up in a matter of weeks with the local elections on May 5th.
Absolutely. And I think if you look at where there are elections, so we've obviously got all-ups in here in Wales and in Scotland, but also significant elections in London, and then obviously some of the Mets as well. And
the boroughs. Let's just keep the boroughs in mind as well.
And boroughs, sorry. Yeah. Let's not forget that often that tends to be slightly better for Labour in the type of seats that are up this time. Not universally, obviously, but I think it might be parties are all pretty much staying the same. I'm not going for any massive change this time. I think Scotland will be quite an interesting test for how the SNP are going. In a similar way, they've been able to hide quite a lot of their incompetence, especially around schools and the massive problems with drugs up there north of the border. But whether it actually has an impact on local elections, I think the biggest thing will be, you probably won't be able to see it, but I've got my council tax in front of me. I think that's going to have a massive impact. And I always find it hilarious that it obviously lands 6 weeks roughly before you go and vote. And whether that has more of an impact, that so many councils are having to make difficult decisions, and whether other political parties have given people an alternative, a different way of doing it. But I think everybody recognises that councils are being stripped of funding, and primarily that is down to the Conservatives.
And I just want to bring up some stats about what happened, because obviously these 2022 elections are slightly different in Wales, because I think you had a 5-year term. But I'm going to just talk about the local elections, because otherwise I'm going to have too many charts and I might just get confused. Is that in 2018 it was a kind of steady as you go election as well. I mean, the Lib Dems and Labour both gained about 70 councillors, and you think about what happened in 2019 when we gained over, I think it was nearly 1,000, did we?
700.
700, yeah, that's right. We won over 1,000 seats, but 700 were gains.
Yeah.
So this was a kind of a middling sort of kind of strange election. But then if you think about the time, the May government was very odd at that point. So where we go from that is very different. But again, Labour might think, well, yeah, we had Jeremy Corbyn as our leader still in 2018, who couldn't win anything ever, anytime. So Labour might be thinking, actually,
I will say as well, last time these seats were fought, momentum were a bigger factor as well for the Labour Party than I would argue they are now. both in terms of they actually did campaign, whether it be a form of campaigning that the rest of us would want to be done in our name, that's a different point of view. But I think we are seeing the decline of momentum, and whether that was a unifying force for a certain demographic of people that won't have that type of Labour councillor on the ballot paper, that will be interesting too.
We're going to let Sam in a second, I promise. He's now back and looks stable. But it's interesting to see, actually, in 2018, that it was London that skewed it a lot. So obviously, Lib Dems have very strong areas in London, and we were hoping to make even more gains in places like Wimbledon that we hope to take and things like that. But the Conservatives actually gained seats outside of London in 2018. So there is an opportunity there that the Tory vote can't be as strong as it was last year. I think that would be my opinion. That's from the feeling I get, is that a lot of people that voted, may have switched from UKIP or Labour to UKIP, then to Tories. I don't feel the same enthusiasm out there. I'll let you know again tonight when I go out canvassing this evening, doing postal votes, which again, all good Lib Dems should now be doing, thinking about your postal voters, get out there and get door knocking. But Sam, what are your views on the local elections coming up? Do you think, and I do have to make a point, it'll be very remiss of us not to, huge elections in Northern Ireland this year as well. And actually the Alliance Party seems to be doing very well in the polls. But then what that means for Brexit going on, if suddenly the DUP get absolutely annihilated, will be very interesting. Sam?
I think it's interesting in terms of because the Conservative vote last year was much higher. I think you had this experience, and a lot of people did, not universally, but in my ward, they more than doubled their vote between election cycles, local election cycles, and we weren't expecting that. So I know they're not going to do the same as that again, and that is where bluntly, my strategy is. There's a big bunch of votes that went Conservative last time that I don't expect to see be Conservative in the same way, because they jumped on that Boris bandwagon effect. That was how it felt as it happened, and it doesn't feel like there's any equivalent now. And speaking, going out canvassing people, those Tory voters aren't saying I'm voting Tory, and they weren't massively last time, but they also definitely weren't saying that they were voting for us. I was getting no reaction, whereas now I'm not voting Conservative.
Now, Claire,
so it does feel. There does feel to be a change there.
Claire will have all sorts of details, which I'm not going to ask her to do, because obviously that would be giving away too many secrets. But again, I was going to reiterate what Sam said. Last year, we got trolley loads of don't knows. Absolutely trolley. And the way we work it out and the way campaigners work it out is that you take 50% of those don't knows and assume they're going to your main opposition. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. And we got swept aside, and we couldn't fight against that really as much as we tried, particularly with limited campaigning and all that's happened. So obviously all good Lib Dems out there, do get out campaigning. I think, but I'm really interested, Claire, from your thoughts. Again, I don't want to give away any trade secrets here or anything like that, but what's your impression of where the Lib Dems are in terms of out? Because again, just a little bit of build up on here, because 2019, we saw here the don't knows that came from Tories voted for us. Yeah. And then the don't knows last year went back to Tory. So how is that? And again, we're in a kind of a suburb of a northern town, stroke city. So where are you feeling the Lib Dem vote is at right now?
It feels so. I keep saying this where we are doing stuff, it feels strong, and that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. That shouldn't be news to anybody listening to this podcast. That if we put in the work, we're well known locally. Our vote feels very, very strong, and I'm sure we'll get across the line. It is those, as you say, those marginals. Now, I've spoken to some Tories recently on the doorsteps. Or at least people that are on my paper as Tory, or minivan, sorry, and whether I'm getting a bit of whether there's a shy Tory vote there. They don't actually want to admit that they're ever going to vote Conservative ever again. And it's just whether they have been switched enough by the positive things that we are doing in local areas. And again, that's where the strong record of action really kicks in. But as you say, I think it's like I keep saying, pushing at an open door. It feels like people are open to a discussion with us about what we do differently. If we are the change vote, which we are in the majority of our seats, then actually there's a real opportunity to say how we do things differently. But people are prepared to have those conversations with us, which sadly, a couple of years ago, they definitely didn't want a conversation with us on the doorstep. And I sort of think if we all treat Chesham and Amersham and North Shropshire as examples, that's how it sort of feels to me in some of those conservative areas, that nobody's really been sticking up for them. Yep. So therefore, it's all to play for, but you have to put the work in to get the people over the line.
And it's easy to forget how restricted we were on campaigning ahead of the last local elections. There were big chunks where I couldn't even get leaflets out, never mind go knocking on doors. The canvassing was really restricted down to sort of phone canvassing where people are have got that existing record of numbers, and door to door right at the very end, really. Whereas this time out, there's while there have been restrictions at times, we've got, certainly where I am, got a full year of campaigning, really proper all year round, delivering on people's doors, doing things and talking to them about it. And hopefully that's going to make a difference.
For my kind of summary of it would be, I think the Tory vote will go down naturally. I think that was a high watermark last week. I don't think that means they're going to vote anyone else. And I think what the Lib Dems have to do in these seats is give them a reason, an opportunity to vote Lib Dem. So they won't do it on their own. They need to be given that push. And that's why North Shropshire, in particular, we've done too many leaflets in North Shropshire. We did enough leaflets to give people an option to say, wow, Helen Morgan's really doing something here. And I should just say congratulations to Helen Morgan. 100 days in the job, and she's going to come back on the podcast and talk about those 100 days. So that's wonderful. But I do think from a local point, if you're just expecting the Tory vote to collapse and come across you, you're not going to win. You have to earn that victory. And it can be frustrating because sometimes our opposition don't earn that victory. We lost a seat last year. The Tories didn't earn it. They did absolutely nothing in that seat, and a national wave kind of took it off us. That we are not, and I've said to our campaign, it can be really frustrating. Yeah, it's a different set of rules for us. We have to earn every single vote. All right, I'm just getting nods. I'm going to say they took that as an agreement. So, right, okay, we're into the election period, so let's just tell people what they should be doing. So, right now, you should be getting your nomination forms in, or have already got your nomination forms in, which are by far the worst part of political campaign. For all those listeners and watchers who don't know what that is, that if you want to stand a candidate other than in Wales, you have to find 10 signatures.
In Scotland as well.
Are they gone in Scotland as well? Right, I need to get out of England. This is the only thing. You need to have 10 signatures of residents within your ward and who are electors to be able to stand, and it is a right royal pain. In areas where we're strong, absolutely fine, but in areas where we're not, it's a faff, and it's a lot of work. So you need to be doing that. Other thing, the big one is postal votes, Claire, isn't it? That is what's coming up now.
Absolutely. They are key to all of our local elections. The turnout tends to be significantly lower across the piece compared to general elections. And therefore, when over 80% of your postal votes tend to vote, it's vital that those are the voters that you're especially going and talking to. So if you've only got time to go and particularly talk to one set of voters, go and talk to your postal voters.
Yeah, absolutely right. Anything further to add to that, Sam?
I'm going to say this is something that came out of my thing last year. We got funding for a specific assessment of different projects, and we did stuff around targeting sort of emails and casework. One of the things that came out of it was the number of people who are on our email list who went and voted was the same percentage as postal voters. And they have signed up to something Lib Dem. So if you have email addresses for people, I would shove those people onto your list as well as postal voters. I think they're really important people.
And I think any interaction, again, the same with anybody who signed a petition or a survey, I do the same.
And one of the things we want to just talk about a little bit is actually managing yourself during campaigns. It is, I think, well, I'm not up this year, but it doesn't mean, I don't take time off because, I want to get my colleagues elected. And Sam, you're up this year. I think, no, you're not up this year. Okay, Hannah is, I think, in our wonderful group. I think Hannah's up. But you've got to pace yourself as well. So if you think, right, it's only 40 days to the election. It's actually less than that now. Don't want to panic you even more. And you think, I've got to do everything. I've got to do my whole ward this week. You're not going to do it. You're going to burn out. Do a little, do it often, and slightly increase it as you're getting close to the polling day, both postal vote polling day and traditional polling day. Because otherwise, if you burn out or stress out, then you are not going to be able to last this campaign. And just do what you can do. Is that your advice, Claire?
Absolutely. And I think also trying to find some friends that maybe are outside of your bubble, that can both be frustrating that they're not getting as potentially as stressed as you are about local elections, but at the same time it will just give you a bit of perspective on that there is another world out there. I always call my best friend a lot more around election time than I do normally, and that's probably a failure on my part, but it's just to speak to somebody about something nonsensical that, what we watched on TV, not that we have time to watch TV, but
get distracted.
That type of information. Ask her about how her family are, what's she up to, etc. Just somebody outside of the bubble really always helps me. And the other thing that always does it for me is eating well. I tend to eat quite badly around elections, so I quite often don't do too much on a Sunday, apart from emails, etc. I actually do quite a bit of batch cooking, and I also do quite a bit of making up little pots of different fruit and veg so I can snack on that. Otherwise I'll sit here eating donuts. So yeah.
Comment below what do you think Claire's best batch cooking is. I'm gonna go with cottage pie or something like that. What about you, Sam?
I'm a big fan of batch cooks lasagna. I've got 3 lasagnas and 2 fish pies currently in the freezer. I think they're good ones.
There we go. But also, I'm going to some more tips here, and this isn't an advert for the ALDC or anything like that, even though they are very good for this stuff. Don't do things you don't have to do. If you've got an ALDC membership, use their templates. Talk to, and if you're really struggling, talk to your regional officers. They might be able to adapt that regional template. Because I'll admit, so we got a regional officer because we'd done our first leaflet, and he said, "Actually, can I help you write any of the other ones?" And he's done the rest of them for me, and that's, I don't think they'll do that for everyone. He's probably going to get absolutely inundated with stuff now. But actually, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You don't have to have a particular focus that's just for Oldham. The templates are there to help you out. Likewise, when you get into the election, you think, I just don't know how I'm going to do this. There are people there that know, who have done this for decades and decades and decades, who can give you advice probably in an instant to save you thinking about it for half a day. So do take that and like I say, look after yourself, but do get out there and campaign. That's the only thing. The weather is supposed to be good in April, but also make it fun if you can as well. Have a drink afterwards. We have an action day pretty much every Saturday now, and then we're up to the elections. Have a drink, socialise afterwards, because it's a long old slog. Particularly, we had to do one of our main candidates just got COVID this week. So by actually having a group of us, we came together and cleared her ward for her. That was just what we had to do. So work as a team and don't try and take too much on yourself. Sam, is that about roughly what you will be doing?
No, I'll be taking on far too much work on my own and doing all the bad things that you've just warned against. But I will try and do all the right things. Yeah. I also think the socialising thing, I think, is a really important thing, because I think we've really got out of the habit. I know in my area we have, because it's all Zoom calls and just getting things done in bits and pieces, and you lose that sense of a team really easily. And I think the more you can do that, just kind of getting people around, sitting in outside, especially, there is still COVID going around, sit outside, have a nice drink, have a chat, take that time to relax. It's really important. It'll feel so much more fun. All the rest of it will feel so much more fun if you do that.
I think as well, because a part of that conversation, you manage to say one nasty conversation that you've had on the doorstep, and you get it off your chest at that event rather than taking it home with you. And I think that had a massive impact on on campaigners last year, that if they had a bad phone call or they had a bad doorstep experience, actually they weren't able to go and share it with anybody because of the COVID regulations. So I think actually I always find it a really good debrief for everybody, sharing the positives, but also if you have had, you know, a slightly bad experience, the majority aren't at the moment, but if you have had just that one doorstep that you know you're going to carry around with you, actually getting it out at that event rather than taking it home is a massive weight off lots of people's shoulders. And we should never be frightened of saying that we've had a bad experience either. You know, I would say that's the power of some of the WhatsApp groups that I'm in, having a bit of a laugh about something that's happened whilst you've been out campaigning is really, really valuable. So just try and make sure that you're trying to leave the doorstep when you've left it rather than taking it on with you for the rest of the campaign.
And that's a good thing about, again, I remember doing a canvassing session. We all know, all of us at Knock on Doors, there are some choice individuals across your ward that you bump into. And I had got every rotten, grumpy bugger going in that particular canvas session, and we had a drink afterwards, and everyone else was raving about how good that canvas session was. But I was like in like near despair that, oh, what's happened to our vote? But actually it eases out those kind of, because you might just bump into a couple of people having a bad day, and then suddenly you get a more rounded picture by doing it in that group. And
candidatitis, for those of you especially that are newer candidates, is real. Like, I didn't think it was real until I stood as a candidate, but it is, because, like you say, you take on board that one person that you've spoken to rather than the 10 other conversations that are actually quite good. And I think it's everybody in the team knowing that there is a dynamic there. If some people will be extremely nervous about at the moment about standing, both, you know, some of it people's livelihoods that are at stake, and sadly it's at the whim of a vote. So, you know, do bear that in mind, that there are a lot of candidates that are taking a lot on, and really do rely on you know, being a councillor for money, and this isn't the easiest time in the world to lose that money either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just in a little bit of a reverse of that as well, go and check in on the other people. Like, I'm not going to go into the details of it. I've just had a pretty horrific experience. And props to, I mean, a few of the people on the podcast, but Lisa Smart in particular just got in touch with me and just went, here for you. You've got this. You're great. And I cried with happiness. So, you know, it really means something to people when you do take the time to check in and make sure they're okay.
Yeah. And it's the rule, isn't it? It's the look after the victim, don't worry about the perpetrator, in terms of that. And that's what, you know, what you're going through, Sam, has been particularly rough. And I said, we're not going to go into it here, but, you know, we are like a Lib Dem family in terms of the group. And, you know, and when something happened, I said, I messaged you privately, said I got quite defensive. You know, I'm going to come down to Oldham and help you. But do look after yourselves out there. We will be doing more episodes as we go on. We're going to have, obviously, shout outs to do with the Scottish elections. I'm sure Claire can rustle up some Welsh speakers to talk about what's going on in Wales. We will try and get someone over to do with the Northern Ireland elections and London elections. So we'll have lots more content coming up. We have been, I will hold my hand up. It is a very busy time for myself. So the podcast may not be as frequent as the post-election period, but because we've got to go and win stuff. But we really appreciate everyone who listens to us. We know there's so much going on. I mean, the cost of living crisis is utterly terrifying for so many people. And for a lot of people like my age, I'm nearly 40, they have never really had to go through something as rough as this. So again, if you're struggling in any way, talk to Lib Dems. If you're thinking, I just don't know what I can do, I've got to worry about this, that, or the other, talk to fellow Lib Dem groups. Or if it's non-Lib Dem related, again, talk to people. If you're struggling financially or whatever else, there are places that can help you kind of have a fitter finances, so to speak. So do look after yourselves. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Sam, for coming on today, even though it's slightly intermittent at times. And I think we want to do a final shout out to Claire, who is been such a wonderful person for the Lib Dems, and what she does will be very, very missed. And and you know how much you mean to a lot of us, not just at the podcast, but in the whole Lib Dem family. So, but I'm sure you'll be available for WhatsApp messages and everything else. No, not even WhatsApp messages. You're not even going to do that.
Select few.
Okay,
I'm going to look forward to it. I'm never saying never coming back.
Claire's number will be in the description below. No, but thank you so much, Claire, and and thank you everyone for listening and watching. Do follow everything to the podcast and at Lib Dem Pod. You can always comment on everything that's happened in the podcast, and thank you to those that do. Particularly on YouTube, we get very, very, very long. We have people arguing with each other on our YouTube channel, which is very interesting to watch sometimes. But thank you everyone who does comment, and do let us know if you want us to do a particular episode on a particular type of campaign. It's been a long time since we did a canvassing 101 or whatever, because again, some people will be absolutely brand new at this and never done it before. So if you do want things like that, do let us know and we can certainly do an episode on it. But in the meantime, do keep safe, everyone. We'll be back with another episode very soon.